This bed is on fire.
10 years ago, my best friend Lorelai and I went to the opening night screening of American Reunion. We were both just 2 years away from our own 10-year high school reunion, and it felt fitting that we would watch a group of characters that we grew up with attend their own. When the original film was released in July of 1999, it created headlines. At the time of its release, it was seen as the return of a genre that we never thought we'd see again, a hard R sex comedy. Even in 1999, some of the scenes were problematic. Even less of the original film holds up well under a modern lens. I would say that it was a different time, but it would strictly be an explanation, not an excuse. While I try to meet films where they were at the time of the release, the reality is that there was never a point where the most controversial moments in this movie were ever truly considered okay. Despite it all, I love this franchise. I love this franchise so much that I even own the unwatchable straight to video releases. The last time you saw me on camera, I was breaking down the 5 year run of Daria and explaining why it captured high school better than any other show. With American Pie, I want to focus on why it has the staying power that it does with a very specific age group, specifically the people who were teenagers between the years of 1994 and 2008. And in order to properly discuss what makes this work, I'm going to have to talk about the history of teen flicks. The origins of the teen flicks are basically attributed to 1971's film Summer of 42 and 1973's American Graffiti. It could obviously be argued that even much further back, there were films like Rebel Without a Cause and Blackboard Jungle. But for the argument of this video, we're going to start in the 80s when John Hughes really built the framework that we know today. Hughes films like 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club, Some Kind of Wonderful, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off all popularized the format that we saw multiple imitators of throughout the 80s. Now, Hughes wasn't the first person to create this format. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Porky's, and Valley Girl all got there first. But Hughes definitely perfected the story beats, character types, and overall tone. With Hughes, the Brat Pack was born, a collection of performers who appeared on multiple films of the genre. While most of the best remembered films from this time period are the aforementioned Hughes films, the imitators also had classic films that are beloved to this day, like Better Off Dead, Say Anything, and St. Elmo's Fire. These PG and later PG-13 films had an element of edge, but ultimately were tame enough for family viewing. The sex comedy format of Porky's and Fast Times was then shifted into college sex films in the vein of Animal House, like the equally problematic Revenge of the Nerds. Suddenly, 1989 ended and teen flicks disappeared in an instant. The early 90s, you had the occasional success with films like House Party, Pump Up the Volume, or Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. And while the characters were definitely in high school, it was hard to put them in the same box as a Ferris Bueller or a Can't Buy Me Love. Then 1995 happened. Suddenly we see the release of films like Angus, Now and Then, and Empire Records, and most importantly, Clueless. It seemed like the high school film was making its comeback, and the following year, Scream was released, and the high school film took a detour into teen slasher films. Suddenly, every week was a new one with a hot 20 something playing a high schooler in danger. However, I would credit 1998's Can't Hardly Wait as the film that fully kickstarted the 90s teen flick craze, leading into the true boom of the early 2000s. Now, next year is Can't Hardly Wait's 25th anniversary, and I am confident that I will be analyzing that much deeper. So, once again, subscribe so you don't miss that. But, guys, now we're here in the year 1999, and movies like 10 Things I Hate About You, Drive Me Crazy, and She's All That are blazing a path for the new version of the framework that once was the 80s high school movie. Occasionally, you would get an edgier R-rated teen flick, but they tended to lean more towards the art house aesthetic. Films like Cruel Intentions, Rushmore, and Election. And then suddenly, American Pie comes out. And while critics believe that this small film could be a sleeper hit, the studio had so little faith in the R-rated teen flick that they put the foreign distribution up for auction. Chances are, even if you've never seen this movie, you know about at least one scene.
Why is he looking at that pie all funny? Oh my God!
Oh, no, he didn't! Oh, you fool!
But for the benefit of people who've never seen American Pie, let's start at the beginning. American Pie was written by Adam Hertz, inspired by 80s sex comedies like Porky's and Bachelor Party. He named his film untitled teen sex comedy that can be made for under $10 million that most readers will probably hate, but I think that you'll love. Talk about shooting your shot. And the gamble paid off. The script was quickly picked up and began filming under the title East Falls. At one point, Jonathan Taylor Thomas was considered to star, with Bill Murray playing his dad. I assume that this didn't pan out because in no world could 1999 JTT be believable as someone struggling to get laid. The film follows our four friends nearing the end of high school. They fear that they will enter college as virgins and make a vow to have sex before they graduate. The film follows their various attempts to achieve this goal, and along the way they find themselves, fall in love, and go through heartache. Front and center of the film is Jim, whose struggles in both sex and self-love are frequently discovered by the most supportive dad in the world, played by Eugene Levy, who improvised almost every line that he has in the movie and undeniably steals the show.
It's like banging a tennis ball against a brick wall, which can be fun. It can be fun, but it's not a game.
Right.
It's not a game.
No.
Here's the big thing I want to stress. I will never say that American Pie is a feminist film because it certainly is not. It is a film packed with highly inappropriate misogynistic moments, although the film that tried to ride the wave of American Pie are much, much worse. The film actually treats its non-foreign exchange women like actually fleshed out characters. Up until this point, any teen comedy that starred a bunch of guys, the women were primarily nameless sex objects, sometimes barely even having a line of dialogue or personality beyond being a prize to be obtained. In the American Pie films, Michelle, Jessica, Vicky, and Heather are fleshed out characters with personalities and goals, and shockingly, one of the films even passes the Bechdel test. If the story ended here, American Pie would be remembered as a film that was unexpectedly successful at the turn of the century that people vaguely remember. However, 2 years later, we saw the release of American Pie 2, and I think that that's what changed everything. I'll give you a second to think about it. What other high school films had a true sequel? Not a direct-to-DVD or a name-and-only release, a genuine franchise-starting sequel. There really, truly isn't one. The few that qualify are like Back to the Future, Harry Potter, or Bill and Ted, which are all fantastical films not rooted in reality like a high school film. We didn't get a sequel to 16 Candles or The Breakfast Club, Say Anything, Can't Hardly Wait, or even 10 Things I Hate About You. The high school films only got sequels if they were blended with another genre like Scream did with horror. American Pie is a classic film, but for my money, American Pie 2 is the best entry in the franchise. In 2002, I received my first DVD player and my first DVD, American Pie 2. In fact, it was my only DVD for a few weeks, so I watched it frequently. I digested every special feature, including almost an hour worth of deleted scenes and subplots, audio commentaries, and behind-the-scenes featurettes. Sure, the movie is funny, but I really believe that this movie is where the true heart of these films shine. Yeah, on one hand, yes, they're immature and offensive sex comedies, but on the other hand, they're beautiful films about high school friendships. In the follow-up film, our four friends have completed their freshman year of college. Oz and Heather have been dating for over a year now and have never been more in love. Finch is more eccentric than ever and has been looking for someone who gives him the same pleasures that Stifler's mom did. Kevin has not gotten over Vicky, and Jim has not successfully had sex since prom. At its core, the movie is about a group of friends concerned that they peaked in high school. Early in the film, they're at Stifler's house, their old stomping ground, at a party primarily attended by high schoolers, and they find themselves wondering if the high schoolers think that they're at a college party, or are they the weird older guys that are hanging out with high schoolers? This theme continues throughout the film. In fact, there was even a deleted scene in which Kevin leaves the party and they find him back at their high school trying to unlock his locker, but the combination has since changed. I love this metaphor, and I really wish that it made it to the final cut. Of course, the film is really funny. Some of the stuff has aged like a glass of milk, admittedly, but it's been over 20 years, and I still laugh at Jason Biggs' incredible physical comedy when he's glued to himself. When I was in high school during summer breaks, I would just sleep in the basement on the couch. It allowed me to stay up late and watch TV without worrying about the volume being too loud for everyone else that was trying to sleep. And I had a handful of movies that were in regular rotation. The first two American Pie movies were definitely among those in the rotation. And to this day, there are certainly moments, particularly in part two, where I can literally remember exactly how my parents' basement looked in the summer of 2002 while watching it. Over the years, there have even been nights where I just skip the first film altogether because the sequel continues to resonate with me more and more. Additionally, have you ever loved a movie because the soundtrack was so good? Actually, let's take a quick pause and discuss the soundtracks for just a few minutes. The American Pie soundtracks are literally the Tony Hawk soundtracks of teen cinema. The first two soundtracks are practically just Spotify playlists for any adult who had a MySpace during middle school. They have songs from bands like Blink-182, Green Day, American Hi-Fi, Goldfinger, Alien Ant Farm, Phoenix TX, Sum 41, Michelle Branch, Lit, Weezer, Offspring, Newfound Glory, Harvey Danger, All American Rejects, Good Charlotte, Sugar Cult, and the best song that Tonic ever wrote. I even had a coworker once argue that the American Pie 2 soundtrack is packed with more bangers than any Hopeless Records or Fat Wreck compilation. Honestly, the soundtrack was a lost art form. Even by the time American Pie was released, the art form was starting to die out. In the early 90s, there would be these huge campaigns for the soundtracks with music videos, and stuff like Empire Records, The Crow, Dangerous Minds, and Lost Highway all had songs that ultimately were more famous than the movies that they were written for. What I'm saying is that I miss teen flicks, I miss movie soundtracks, and I miss music videos being on MTV. I suppose I'm officially an out-of-touch old man. All right, soundtrack tangent over. Back to the movies. All right, before we jump into American Wedding, we do have to talk about a major plot point that led us to that film. In the first movie, Jim loses his virginity to the band geek Michelle, played perfectly by Allison Hannigan. In part two, Jim has a chance at his high school crush, Nadia, but he's worried that he has no clue what he's doing, so he reconnects with Michelle to help coach him on how to be more romantic. And during this time, he falls in love with her. I actually think that the Michelle-Jim love story is the biggest reason why I love American Pie 2. Jim realizing that he's fallen in love with Michelle hits me every single time. I'm still looking for my own Michelle. Quite literally, when I think of every time I've ever wanted romance, I think of a literal 2-second shot of Jim and Michelle dancing together at the final party. I believe it. One day, I'll get that. American Pie 2 was made for $30 million and went on to make $288 million at the box office. There was no chance that they weren't going to move forward with another sequel. And on August 1st, 2003, American Wedding was released in theaters. I remember going to that with my friend, also named Matt, as well as my parents and my 12-year-old brother. Somehow, a movie that starts with a 3-minute blowjob joke isn't the weirdest film that I've had to sit next to my mom while watching, but it is definitely in the top 5. At 17, I loved this movie, but over the last decade, I basically skip it when I watch the franchise. Something feels off with this movie. While it was written by the same writer as the first two films, it just feels like a fan film to me, by someone who didn't really understand what made the movies work. It's almost like the season 4 of Community for the American Pie franchise. Looking at American Wedding actually helps highlight what makes the other films work. American Pie 1 and 2 definitely had their problematic moments and their gross out humor, but at the core, the movie had a ton of heart with a focus on friendship. The movies put Jim and his friends at the forefront with the pie sex and the walkie-talkie sequences as these centerpiece moments that you could sell the movie on. American Wedding is more about having those centerpiece moments throughout and then occasionally peppering in a heartfelt moment with Jim and his friends. It misses the mark so much that one of Jim's friends is missing entirely without any mention of his existence. Within the first 30 minutes of the film, you get a proposal blowjob scene, a sequence where it seems like Jim and Stifler are having sex with two dogs, and Stifler not realizing he's in a gay bar.
Okay, so while we're talking about the gay bar scene, it really is, in my opinion, the most frustrating topic of the franchise. When it comes to homosexuality, it always feels like it wants to have its cake and eat it too. It'll shame Stifler for being a homophobe while also packing in an absurd amount of gay jokes. The sequence in the gay bar is such an outdated caricature that you immediately knew that the writer's room was undeniably the straightest room in history. This small tangent is being brought to you by how little of a desire I have to discuss American Wedding. It is the lowest point in a franchise that many people argue is all low points. The film doesn't contain any unique characters like Oz, Vicky, Shermanator, Jessica, or Heather, but it has Stifler in more of the film than Jim and Michelle, who are the people getting married in the titular American Wedding. Additionally, Stifler's character seems off. It's like he suffered brain damage after the previous film. The first two movies, yeah, he was a loudmouth douchebag who would pop up, say something stupid, and put the characters in a bad situation. But he was almost always the butt of the joke, and we were delighted to see everything blow up in his face. Despite all of this, he was a smooth talker, but in this film, he's a bumbling, sex-crazed idiot who can barely function with anyone in the outside world. There's definitely glimpses of that during the walkie-talkie sequence in part 2, but it was never his entire personality until American Wedding. Thankfully, it wasn't his personality again after this either. Despite all of its faults, the movie was another success, and even the critics seemed to like it. Variety favorably compared it to the work of John Waters, and Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, proving that we give critics way too much credit in the United States. What's shocking, though, is that the film that made 4 times its budget would be followed up with a direct-to-DVD sequel. And for the sake of keeping this video brief,
you're a bit late for that!
I'll quickly focus on the 4 direct-to-DVD releases that came out in 2005, 2006, 2007, and 2009. Although I'm sure we can make a follow-up video to this one just about those travesties.
Every one of these films features Eugene Levy, who would basically just show up for a scene and seem completely lost, but still somehow have the best lines in the movie. The first film was Band Camp, where Stifler's brother has to go to band camp. It's a bad movie, potentially the worst in the entire extended franchise. Jim's dad appears as a guidance counselor at the band camp, filling in for Michelle while she's having a baby. Also, the Shermanator shows up as a school counselor. Like I said, it's just a bad movie. This was followed up by The Naked Mile, in which Stifler's cousin Eric is still a virgin. He goes to visit his cousin, who is yet another new Stifler character that we haven't seen before this, in order to run the annual Naked Mile, and his girlfriend has given him a hall pass for the weekend. Jim's dad shows up as the founder of the Naked Mile. All things considered, I remember this one actually being a pretty decent movie. I haven't seen it in years, but I have confidence that it's still probably more enjoyable than American Wedding. It was followed by Beta House, which was a direct sequel to Naked Mile, and takes place the following year, now that Eric is a full-fledged member of the frat house from the previous film. I remember next to nothing about this movie beyond that it hits every college cliche and that Jim's dad officiates the college Olympics. Finally, there was Book of Love, which is basically a borderline remake of the original movie. The only real noteworthy plot point in this film is that it's revealed that Jim's dad started the book that Kevin finds in the first movie. It appears that the franchise was finally dead in 2009. Or was it?
In 2010, pre-production began on a then untitled sequel, bringing the entire original cast back. This time, the film was being written and directed by the team that created both Harold and Kumar and then later gave us Cobra Kai. The film finds the whole gang coming back to East Falls for their 13-year reunion. All of our characters in this one have their own storylines going on.
Jim and Michelle have hit a sexual lull after having their first child. Jim is helping his dad cope with the death of his wife, who died 3 years earlier. There's also a weird subplot about Jim's childhood neighbor, Kara, that he used to babysit, who for some reason wants to celebrate her 18th birthday by losing her virginity to Jim. It's a truly terrible and unnecessary plot point. I will slightly credit the script for it being made very clear that while Jim does find this teenager attractive, he would never in a million years follow through with what she's proposing. Stifler, on the other hand, completely would. Stifler is the same character, but the issues from American Wedding have been fixed, returning him to a supporting character who's not the focal point of anything. His plot literally centers around his life being fairly miserable because he just won't grow up. And I think that that's pretty fitting. I'd rather not have Stifler living the life of a superstar after being a full-blown womanizer for the last 20 plus years. He does get to have sex with Finch's mom, so at least there's some form of revenge in the movie. And speaking of Finch, throughout the film, he's depicted as the coolest, strangest dude on the planet. As the lone single member of the group, he is pursuing a fellow classmate who used to be in band with Michelle, who we've never heard of or seen before this movie. Kevin is fully domesticated and a stay-at-home dad. Kevin's story, to me, is the most compelling. While the guys bust his chops about being the wife, in the end, the movie is not about how he needs to reclaim his masculinity. Kevin is happy to be a stay-at-home dad, and he loves his wife. They bring back Vicky, and there's a nice storyline about how you will always have feelings for your first love, but Kevin proves to be a very loyal husband. Finally, Oz is a major celebrity on ESPN as a commentator and a former Dancing with the Stars style reality show contestant. He brings his much younger model girlfriend, but then realizes that it has always been Heather who he's been destined to end up with. I wouldn't be able to tell you if this is a good or bad storyline because I love Mina Savory way too much to be objective. Honestly, I struggle with being objective about this movie at all. While I will always be critical of these films for the things that don't hold up, when I saw this in the movie theater, I got choked up.
The name American Reunion was a perfect name for this movie because I really felt like I was being reunited with my old friends. I love teen movies, but films like Can't Hardly Wait, 10 Things, She's All That, and even more obscure titles always stop at graduation. But I watched Jim, Kevin, Oz, and Finch grow up. They went to college. Some of them got married. And I wanted to see them succeed. The movie reminds me of my own high school memories and friends. Nostalgia is a powerful drug. It can put blinders on you for negative stuff and will make something that was mediocre into a masterpiece. When I was a kid, we had a local radio station called Q102 that basically played rap and dance music. At that time, I was exclusively listening to grunge and punk. Thus, I hated listening to Europop and dance tracks, but now I hear those same songs and I can be moved to tears. That's the power of nostalgia. It can make real McCoy choke me up a little bit. American Reunion knows how to tug at that nostalgia, and they do it so well. I literally get choked up watching it when Jim is looking at the porn magazines his dad gave him in the first film. And it's just a perfect ending to this franchise. There was an in-name only release in 2020 called Girls Rule, which tried to gender swap the original film. Unfortunately, it was written and directed exclusively from people who look like me, so it doesn't feel authentic in the slightest. The fact that it was released the year after Booksmart really just adds insult to injury. The film is an American Pie film the same way Dorm Days is a National Lampoon's movie. Since American Reunion, there's been rumors of a part 5 with the same writing and directing team and cast, but even people like Sean William Scott don't see it happening. He was quoted in saying that the American Reunion film wasn't a big enough hit to warrant another movie. But meanwhile, Tara Reid, as recently as last year, said that she's already read the American Pie 5 script and that it's the best one yet. Part of me would love to see my friends again. But I know that the time for these films and these characters has long since passed. My friends may not be perfect. They may have done some really messed up stuff as teenagers. But for a kid staying up late watching movies over summer break, they were some of the best friends in the world. And I'm glad I got to know them.